I don't think this is going to make for a very good video. You know what's depressing? Going on Facebook and realizing that that nervous kid who you were so sure that you were cooler than has morphed into someone with a wife and has become better looking than you are. That's a good feeling. I try and remind myself that everyone on Facebook who has an interesting Facebook picture has been worried enough about how they look to make sure they have an interesting Facebook picture. And in all fairness, I suppose people like me are needed to kind of reassure everyone as the kind of psychological fat friend, so to speak, or the life fat friend. But for everyone, you know, it's an altruistic and benevolent role that I play. I've recently discovered the morning. I actually quite like the morning because the morning, how do I put it? The morning offers you, ordinarily, if you get up in the morning, or rather you wake up, say you wake up at like late in the day, and you're like, fuck this, because you're miserable, and then you drink so that you go back to sleep, it's like dark by the time you wake up. But if you wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then you fuck yourself up with drugs, you wake up and it's still sunny and you can call someone. So I think that's pretty cool, personally. So, of course, the $1 million question is, why am I so fucking miserable? And, you know, they've implicated serotonin a lot in mood. If you look at DMT, if you look at psilocin, lysergic acid diethylamide 25, what you find is primarily they agonize, the 5-HT2A receptors, and I think 5-methoxy-DMT hits the 1A receptors. Now, anyone who's had an experience like this, or has spent an afternoon on Erowid, will be able to tell you that such experiences can be anything from euphoric to petrifying, and sometimes petrifying and then euphoric, usually in that order, if it's going to be in either one. And that's because they're a cleansing. They're the purge, the works. That's what they call ayahuasca sometimes, the works. And it's a good name for it. It's the right name, really. Along with a really, 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 really fucking bitter tea. That's also a good name for it. And anyway, see if you can follow my logic here. If hyperstimulating those receptors in the serotonin system for a brief period of time can cleanse you out and leave you feeling happier than you've been for 10 years, what do you think would happen if those receptors were understimulated indefinitely? It's what I'm going to refer to as the anti-ayahuasca effect. Trying to do one eyebrow, but I can't. Right? Never mind the immediate effects, which are demonstrated by serotonergic drugs. MDMA, of course, being primarily, but not entirely, serotonergic. And the neurogenic effects. It's like, I think it's what I call psychological toxicity. I think it accumulates. And then you're fucked. Like this. Like me. Just giving that bombshell time to, get you. And so I have a working kind of very tentative hypothesis at this point, which is thinking that serotonin is a neurotransmitter. I'm thinking that with some people, they have less serotonin, so certain neurological areas are underactive. Their ability to process, process, good term to use, is reduced. They don't work through their trauma, if you will, or that's the product of not being able to process in this context, is trauma accumulates, psychological toxicity accumulates. And and you get more and more miserable. I believe it's analogous to the, if you're familiar with the methylation cycle block glutathione depletion hypothesis, where you have low glutathione levels and toxins just accumulate. And whereas low glutathione would cause what you might think of as physical toxins to accumulate, low serotonin is going to cause, it's 5-hydroxytryptamine, right? Ever taken a tryptamine? 5-hydroxytryptamine. If you take mushrooms, it's 4-hydroxytryptamine, or 4-phosphorioxy, which transitions is metabolized into 4-hydroxy. So, we're talking very similar to these very powerful hallucinogenics, and, which, never mind all the trippy hallucinatory stuff, ultimately act as psychological cleansing agents. At least they do in a successful trip, Sometimes trips get overwhelming. I know we'll do a separate video on, is there such a thing as a bad trip or not? The short answer is yes, but it's complicated. Yes, but it's not as simple as whether or not you enjoy it. Not enjoying it is not the same as having a bad trip. Having a bad trip is, you'll know if you have a bad trip because you feel fucking terrible afterwards. So, I've coined this the term anti-ayahuasca effect. Thank you very much. We do a separate video on vitamin D. I should leave my videos as chunks, but I've discovered recently that vitamin D is it's a hormone, and it has profound effects on the serotonergic system, which I'm blown away by. And it's one of the things it does is it downregulates monoamine oxidase A, and therefore I was wondering about the potential utility or the nature of the interaction between this hormone. I can't bring myself to call it a vitamin because vitamin is a biological catalyst, and that is not the case. This is actually something that switches on genes and so on. So, or switches off genes in some cases, such as the serotonin reuptake transporter and the monoamine oxidase A enzyme. Although one of which is switches on in tryptophan hydroxylase, and why don't you go and find out what that does, because that's pretty important. So, and if it downregulates monoamine oxidase A by as much as 51%, then we're talking about a substance which, I mean, that's what the harmala alkaloids do in Banisteriopsis carpi, or Panganum harmala for that matter. And that facilitates the acts of DMT. To correct Mr. Rogan on this, he did a pretty good job for an amateur, although I'm also an amateur, you can tell by the dress and gown. But it's true that if you take ayahuasca, the MAOIs inhibit the monoamine oxidase enzyme in the stomach, but it's also very much about inhibiting it in the brain. See, it's one thing, I get somewhat excited that maybe someone's mushroom supply might go a bit further if they have some vitamin D around, but not to mention they may have a better trip because they have more serotonin in their system. But it's something else to think that their experience may be profoundly qualitatively altered, and that's more interesting. And so yeah, I think it's pretty cool. So I'll do a more full video on that, basically saying the same thing, but yeah. Okay, so 12:12, that's what it says at the top of my screen. It's a good time to stop because my last video was 47.5 minutes long. And I've wanted to talk about the anti-ayahuasca effect for quite some time. I think the idea that low levels of serotonin means your ability to process is reduced, and so shit kind of accumulates, psychological toxicity accumulates. Like, it's a pretty brilliant working hypothesis. And then of course the work is, well, how do you undo it? How do you cleanse yourself? I'm pretty sure trees have something to do with that. I'm pretty damn certain. That, and perhaps restoring serotonin levels. And drinking, I'm pretty sure drinking has something to do with it. So, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, and goodbye.